sort of, in my own mind now, I'm putting that back into limbo, waiting to see the actual evidence on that. It makes a lot of sense to me. But I'm like Nick. I would like to, is Nick here today? Oh, okay. I'm like Nick. And Dave is very strong on this too. And when you see Dave's presentations, I mean, he documents every statement he makes, and I like to do that too. If that's true, that would certainly be a major one, because we're talking into the millions of dollars per person. But ultimately, I think perhaps we could add another couple here would be insurance policies and RRSPs.
There's another one. Every time I want money, I sign a promissory note. They don't ask for a guarantee.
Yeah, we can get into that too.
I'm signing another piece of paper.
Yep.
That's letters of credit.
That's your signature.
Yeah.
There's another factoring in relationship to inventories also.
Yes, yeah, factoring is another. Yes, you betcha. The point is that as personal individuals, we go in and with our signature, thank you, Andrew, we authorize through this channel the creation of brand new money that never existed before. This is absolutely essential to understand. The great lie that banks tell, and this is universal, is that they lend depositors money. They have never done it in the history of banking, and if it did, it would be illegal. First of all, ask yourself, do you ever remember signing a contract that stated that the bank could lend your money out to party C? No. And there's another question you can ask yourselves. When in your history of banking have you ever gone to your bank book and seen a debit for, say, $10 as your share of loan to Dave Lindsay? And he needs a lot of money, so maybe we should. I don't think there's one person. Anytime I make a presentation, I ask the question, has anybody here ever seen an entry in their bank book from their bank that shows a debit because of the share of the money that was lent to somebody else? Has anybody here seen that?
It's called your interest.
No, that's another thing now. We're talking about the fact that banks say that they lend depositors money. In a double entry bookkeeping system, you would have to show that. I mean, when I lend somebody $100 in cash, geez, I'm glad I don't have it now. David be after it. When I lend somebody $100 in cash, it's physically out of my pocket into somebody else's. When I give them a check, it's now physically taken out of my account when I lend them by checking. So it has to show up somewhere, but it never does. And there's one more. Those are two methods to show that that's a lie, but there's a third one. And that is when you take a look at the agglomerate of all of the money that is in circulation, and if that were true, that banks only lend depositors money, then how is it that the total money supply in the 60s was in the 60 billion, and today we're well over 700 billion alone in the debt, and of that 700 billion, by the way, there is 120 billion grand total in money. When you total up all the money in everybody's bank account and all of the businesses' bank accounts, and you total it all up, it comes to $120 billion. How do you pay a $4.7 trillion debt with only $129 billion in circulation? But if all they could ever do was lend depositors money, how was it back in the teens, back in the 60s? It's not possible. It's totally impossible. So, these are the collateralizing assets for the individuals. So if everybody has that, I will take that off because I will now need to deal with business. How does business collateralize their loan?
Bonds?
Sorry?
Bonds?
Okay.
Potential.
Potential? Potential what? That's usually not going to get it from a bank. They want that potential backed up by something. You're getting close. But yeah, inventory and existing business assets. Existing business assets. And the biggest one, which probably many people here in the room are familiar with, is the personal guarantee.
The directors, the owners of the company would have to personally sign something, maybe from their own personal accounts or something, wouldn't they? In many cases?
And that's where the personal guarantee comes in. In the experience that I had, and that was a little over 10 years ago, the personal guarantee that I had to get involved in was when I was a portion of $100,000, they wanted $300,000 personal guarantee from me. It's usually a minimum of 3 to 1. So if you have a $100,000 loan, they want a 3 to 1 personal guarantee commitment. So that means you have to go into the bank and sign over the ability of the bank to seize your personal assets to the point of $300,000 if you're trying to get $100,000 backing for that business. Now, again, we go back to the list that we had before as to what those assets are so that you can total that $300,000. But basically, people and business authorize the creation, again, of brand new money that never existed before. So we come to government. What do you think government uses to collateralize?
Vern, before you leave that, I think we want to talk about the biggest fraud inflicted on mankind in the last 100 years, and what business, once it gets above small business, where most of us function, is the stock market.
We can talk about that. Can I leave that for a little bit later? It's sort of, I'm trying to go through a channel here, a flow chart, keeping everybody, that's a good point, there's no question. Excuse me. How does the government collateralize its portion? What did somebody say there? Yeah, precisely. Surprise, taxation. So it all comes back to us again. The government collateralizes their creation of brand new money through these entities, and they issue treasury bills and they issue other debt instruments. One of my very close friends in Edmonton has a copy of a non-callable bill to the order of $250 million at 13.5% interest. Doesn't that blow you away? Non-callable. Because that's the arrangement the government has with the banks. Non-callable means that even if the interest rates drop to 0.5%, they can't call it back. It stays at 13.5%. And there are probably hundreds of billions of dollars worth of those sitting with the banks right now. Now, keep in mind that I'm getting ahead of myself here. So,
Isn't that a perpetual loan, non-callable?
well, no, it's got a term, and the term was 25 years. Yeah, non-callable for 25 years. Good question. So that's it. Taxation is what the government uses to collateralize its portion of the injection of brand new money into society.
Why do these huge corporations pay crazy taxes? Like in the billions of dollars?
That's a good question. Can you make a point to answer that later? Because I'm going to answer that one in conjunction. It's an excellent question because it also comes into why are they all merging? And you'll see why when you take a look at this full flow chart.
Can I ask this? The banks, like it's not our money, it's the bank's money.
Well, if you put up a real, let's make a real positive distinction right now between real assets and financial assets. You need to get that distinction in your mind. There's a big difference between a real asset and a financial asset. A real asset is something that has immediate utility, meaning that you can use it to better your life. It's clothing, it's food, it's tables, it's chairs, it's automobiles, it's a house. These are real assets. things you can touch and feel, services could be considered a real asset. A financial asset, go back to basics again, is a claim to real assets. You always have to separate the two. A financial asset is supposed to be a reflection of reality, a reflection of reality. So that when you take a look at the situation, let me just, where you decide to collateralize your house. You got a $200,000 house and you want to temporarily extract the liquidity, some of the liquidity from that home, say to the tune of $100,000. So you go to the bank and pledge your real asset to temporarily monetize or extract the liquidity, extract the value in financial terms. And so the bank will say, yes, when you pledge that to us, we will do that. And so they now put in your bank book $100,000 upon which you can write checks. But they won't give you that in cash. I can guarantee you. They'll allow you to draw it on your account, but they will not give it to you in anything other than your ability to draw it. That money never existed before you walked into that bank. Never existed. It's brand new money. So you got $100,000. If you own the house, you also own the credit. It's yours. And yet they are charging you interest on your own credit. It is yours. It's very important to understand that. And what you've done is you've entered into a contract that says that over a certain period of time you agree to pay back. Now, I'm just slightly getting ahead of myself here. This chart that we see here, does this represent the full flow chart of money into society? Does it? If it's a flow chart, it can't possibly. Because if we have this money coming into society, and by the way, as somebody has already said, and as we've already pointed out, it's all in the form of loans. It's all in the form of loans. So that can't possibly be the full flow chart, because what goes into society as a loan must come back out of society as a repayment. So, we essentially have X dollars in repayments. Thank you. Does that answer all of the flow chart?
No.
What's missing?
You got the interest, the compound interest.
Absolutely. We completely forgot about interest. This is an artsman's flow chart, so just bear with me here, okay? Gee, that's kind of an interesting flow chart, isn't it? John Kenneth Galbraith once said, and he was the leading establishmentarian so-called economist, he once said, "The method by which banks create money out of nothing is so simple it repels the mind." I really need you to completely understand that, because I didn't pick up on this in the first time, the second time, the 10th time. I didn't completely get everything that had been told to me. The evidence was there, but I didn't pick up on it. I just kept saying to myself, it can't be that simple. And folks, it is. They disguise what they're doing through all these different gobbledygook and economics theories that they tell us, but ultimately it is that simple. And you know, this reminds me of one of my favorite stories. It reminds me of the story that did it for me. And a lot of you here have heard it before, and I'm sorry I've got to repeat it again, because if I just hit one person in this room with this story, it will have been worthwhile. It's called the Federal Saloon. I didn't come up with it. It was proffered, to the best of my knowledge, by Senator Jack Metcalf of Washington State many, many years ago. I've expanded on it, but he brought it to my attention, and I think it's very illustrative. 4 cowboys walk into a bar, and they walk up to the bartender and they say, "Bartender, we've been on the road for 2 weeks. We're hot, we're dirty, we're thirsty. We want 8 beers on the counter right now, frosty, and bring them out. We're thirsty." And so the bartender reaches back into his fridge and he pulls out 8 frosty beers and he puts them down on the counter. And one of the cowboys reaches forward to pay for them. And they take the beers back to the table, and then one of the cowboys says, "You know, we'd like to sit here and buy some steak sandwiches and order some food and some more beer, but we'd just like to have ourselves a little game of cards. Can we borrow a deck of cards from you?" And the bartender says, "Well," he said, "I've never seen you guys before in my life." He says, "How do I know if I lend you a deck of cards, I'm going to get those cards back at the end of the night?" And the cowboy says, "Trust me, we're going to give you, lots of business, and we're going to give them back to you, no problem." He says, "Well, I sure appreciate your business, but I just have no guarantee that you're going to give those cards back to me." And so one of the cowboys reaches down and he picks up his $2,000 saddle and he puts it up on the bar and he says, "If you don't get that 25-cent deck of cards back, you get to keep my $2,000 saddle." And the bartender says, "Well, I appreciate your show of good faith." He said, "But what about your buddies? What if one of them walks out with my deck of cards?" And so he says, "Mo, Frank, Larry, get over here. Bring your saddles." Make a long story short, all 4 saddles end up on the bar. And the bartender reaches under the counter and he pulls out a deck of cards and he puts it up on the counter and he says, "Now you boys go have yourselves a real good game." And one of the cowboys reaches for the deck of cards, and at the last second the bartender grabs his hand and he says, "And by the way, at the end of the night, I want 56 cards back."